Within the Gospel of Thomas lie 114 recorded statements said to come directly from Jesus Christ. And yet, for close to 2 millennia, this text lay concealed beneath the sands of Egypt, while the Christian Church branded it as heresy. What led to its burial? What hidden truths might it hold? Today, we'll explore the full story behind this disputed document, tracing its enigmatic beginnings, its stunning rediscovery, and the fierce, scholarly debates it continues to spark. For those just joining this channel, please think about tapping that like button and subscribing if you haven't done so yet. When you support us, it allows us to create more videos like this one, exploring lesser-known biblical writings and also narrating well-loved classics to help you find calm and relaxation. And please, share with us your location and your current time. We're creating a community right here, giving you the chance to connect with others who share your interests from every corner of the globe in the comments below. So then, without any more delay, shall we begin? Secrets rest beneath the shifting sands of the Egyptian desert. Back in December of 1945, a farmer in his youth, Muhammad al-Saman by name, made his way across the dusty terrain close to the settlement of Nag Hammadi. Fertilizer was what his family required for their fields. Along the cliffs that bordered the Nile River, there were often deposits of sabach to be found, a nutrient-rich earth ideal for cultivating crops. In Muhammad's hands was a basic mattock, a farming implement made smooth through countless seasons of labor. He came upon a boulder sitting against the rocky face. This particular spot seemed unusual somehow. The earth appeared softer here, more full of promise, so he started digging. His implement hit against something solid. Then it happened again. The sound it made echoed oddly in the arid atmosphere. Muhammad cleared more soil away, uncovering the rounded rim of a sizable ceramic jar. This vessel measured nearly 2 feet in height and was closed with a weighty cover. Its surface bore ancient markings, etched there by hands that had labored many centuries prior to his own existence. Within Muhammad's thoughts, fear wrestled against curiosity. According to local folklore, jinn, or spirits, inhabited old vessels. To open containers like these might invite catastrophic misfortune. Yet at the same time, this jar could potentially hold riches, perhaps gold coins capable of altering his family's circumstances. The urgent necessity for income ultimately defeated old superstitions. Muhammad lifted his mattock up high and struck it down with force. The jar broke apart, sending forth a cloud of dust that had remained trapped for more than 1,500 years. Rather than discovering gold, he came upon packages of aged papyrus, secured in leather wrappings and enclosed in fabric. The pages appeared delicate, seemingly ready to disintegrate at the slightest contact. Disappointment filled the farmer's heart. These yellowed sheets held no value for him whatsoever. The peculiar letters covering each surface were beyond his ability to decipher. Certain pages displayed symbols entirely unfamiliar to his eyes. Other pages showed illustrations featuring circles and crosses that appeared to vibrate with concealed significance. Muhammad collected the books regardless. His mother had a use for old paper when lighting fires for preparing meals. These ancient writings could fulfill that same function. He bundled the packages within his robe and transported them back to his dwelling, traveling the identical route his forebears had walked for many generations. Once home, Muhammad's mother inspected these mysterious volumes. She recognized their potential as fuel for her cooking fire. Multiple pages vanished into the flames during that evening, their inscriptions transforming into smoke and cinders. Ancient wisdom, safeguarded through long centuries of obscurity, became fuel for the fire that heated a humble supper. But destiny intervened through human avarice. A merchant from the locality caught wind of rumors regarding Muhammad's find. Stories circulated through the village that the farmer had discovered something old and possibly of worth. The merchant made an offer to purchase the remaining books, with hopes of selling them within Cairo's market for antiquities. Muhammad accepted this proposal, pleased to convert worthless paper into actual currency. The merchant wrapped the codices with care and set out on the journey northward. His instincts told him these writings possessed greater worth than the humble farmer understood. Within Cairo, dealers inspected the books with mounting enthusiasm. The papyrus appeared genuine, authentically ancient. The script style indicated extraordinary age. One after another, the books started appearing in the shadowy realm of antiquities commerce. Scholars glimpsed fragments of pages that appeared to preserve early Christian writings. Word spread throughout academic networks about a collection of documents potentially capable of rewriting history itself. Egypt's government, grasping the potential significance of these discoveries, initiated attempts to recover the dispersed volumes. However, certain books crossed beyond Egypt's frontiers before authorities could intervene. Private collectors and museums obtained individual codices, each one representing a fragment of a greater mystery. The library that had rested undisturbed in the desert across centuries now found itself fragmented across multiple continents, its unity shattered by human ambition and academic rivalry. The site where Muhammad made his discovery turned into a destination of pilgrimage for academics. They examined the cliff surface, hunting for evidence about who had concealed these writings and for what purpose. The desert winds kept blowing across that landscape, bearing whispers of ancient mysteries that had waited with patience for their moment of unveiling. Years would pass before experts fully grasped the true scale of what Muhammad had accidentally uncovered. He had stumbled upon one of the 20th century's most significant archaeological discoveries. Yet on that December day back in 1945, he was merely a young farmer searching for fertilizer, completely unaware that his mattock had just struck a treasure surpassing gold in value. The desert had preserved its secrets remarkably well, shielding them through invasions, through religious upheavals, and through time's slow progression. Now these voices from antiquity would speak once more, bearing messages from an era when Christianity appeared vastly different from what it would eventually become. The missing gospel. Those bundles of papyrus Muhammad al-Saman found held 52 distinct texts composed in Coptic, the tongue spoken by ancient Egypt's Christian populations. Scholars examining these documents came to understand they were holding something truly extraordinary. These weren't simply any old books. They represented early Christian compositions that had vanished from history for over 1,000 years. Within those leather-bound codices, one particular text emerged with striking force. It opened with straightforward words destined to shake biblical scholarship to its foundations. These are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke, and which Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. That opening statement immediately indicated this book claimed direct association with Jesus himself. What followed in the text appeared unlike anything scholars had encountered previously. Most Gospels recount narratives about Jesus, portraying his journeys, his miraculous works, and his interactions with followers. This document held no such narratives whatsoever. Rather, it offered 114 sayings credited to Jesus, each one prefaced by the expression, "Jesus said." Dr. Jean Doresi, a French academic working within Egypt, numbered among the first to grasp this particular text's importance. He studied those opening statements and sensed the ground shifting under his feet. Could this truly represent another gospel? The document asserted it recorded Jesus' actual words, safeguarded by someone calling himself Thomas. The world of scholarship responded with both excitement and controversy. Academic gatherings erupted into passionate arguments. Certain researchers maintained that this text, now identified as the Gospel of Thomas, might genuinely preserve Jesus' utterances with greater accuracy than the canonical Gospels. Others rejected it as a subsequent fabrication produced by heretical movements to bolster their own theological positions. The structure of Thomas puzzled everyone. The canonical Gospels weave Jesus' teachings into narratives about his existence and death. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all organize their records around the crucifixion and resurrection. Thomas disregards these events completely, concentrating solely on enigmatic sayings that appear to indicate hidden spiritual realities. Numerous sayings within Thomas sounded recognizable to biblical experts. Some matched verses discovered in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Others resonated with the hypothetical Q source, a collection of Jesus' sayings that scholars theorized the gospel authors had utilized as reference material. Yet Thomas also preserved sayings appearing nowhere else in early Christian literature. The familiar sayings brought both reassurance and bewilderment. When Thomas quoted Jesus stating, "Blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven," scholars recognized the link to the Sermon on the Mount. However, Thomas frequently positioned these familiar words within unusual new frameworks, surrounded by cryptic declarations that seemed to originate from an entirely different spiritual realm. The unfamiliar sayings created even greater challenges. Thomas quoted Jesus, expressing things such as, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." These words carried profound yet mysterious weight, absent the straightforward moral direction that distinguished much of Jesus' teaching within the canonical Gospels. Leaders of the Church reacted to Thomas with profound mistrust. The text appeared to advocate a variety of Christianity that circumvented traditional religious hierarchy. Where the canonical Gospels highlighted Jesus' position as Savior and the significance of believing in his death and resurrection, Thomas concentrated on interior spiritual knowledge and individual transformation. The theological consequences troubled many believers. If Thomas genuinely preserved Jesus' authentic words, then traditional Christianity might have overlooked vital dimensions of his message. The text indicated that salvation arrived through comprehending hidden truths instead of through faith in Jesus' sacrificial death. This viewpoint endangered fundamental Christian teachings that had directed believers for nearly 2,000 years. Academic institutions discovered themselves positioned between scholarly inquisitiveness and religious pressure. Universities housing theological seminaries confronted difficult questions about how to examine texts challenging orthodox conviction. Certain scholars conducted their investigations quietly, releasing their discoveries in specialized publications that few people encountered. Others welcomed the controversy, employing Thomas to advocate for radical reinterpretations of Christian history. Thomas's discovery compelled scholars to face uncomfortable questions regarding Christianity's development. If this text genuinely originated in the 1st or 2nd century, as numerous experts concluded, then early Christianity had exhibited far more diversity than previously conceived. The unified faith emerging from church councils and creeds might have represented merely one choice among numerous competing interpretations of Jesus' message. Libraries and museums vied to obtain sections of the Nag Hammadi library, including copies of Thomas. Every institution desired to house texts potentially capable of rewriting religious history. The Jung Codex, containing a complete copy of Thomas, became a prize contested by scholars, collectors, and national governments. The Gospel of Thomas had surfaced from the Egyptian desert, bearing questions destined to transform biblical scholarship. Its straightforward format concealed intricate theological challenges that continue shaping religious thought in our time. The text opening with an assertion about secret sayings had truly disclosed secrets, though they were secrets concerning the diversity and complexity of early Christian belief. Thomas the Twin, the individual who asserted he had transcribed Jesus' secret sayings, bore a name revealing his mysterious character. Didymus, Judas, Thomas carried 3 names, each bearing its own meaning. Thomas signified twin in Aramaic, whereas Didymus signified twin in Greek. Both designations indicated the same identity. This apostle became known as the Twin, although history never clearly revealed whose twin he supposedly was. The New Testament depicts Thomas as a multifaceted figure remembered chiefly for his renowned doubt concerning Jesus' resurrection. When the remaining disciples insisted they had witnessed the risen Jesus, Thomas required physical evidence. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and place my finger where the nails were and place my hand into his side, I will not believe." This instance of skepticism granted him the enduring label of Doubting Thomas. Yet, Thomas's biblical appearances disclose more than mere skepticism. Within the Gospel of John, he displayed notable bravery when Jesus chose to journey back to Judea despite death threats. While other disciples voiced fear, Thomas proclaimed, "Let us also go that we may die with him." This declaration revealed someone willing to confront danger alongside his teacher even when the road ahead appeared deadly. That same Gospel of John documented another significant instance when Thomas posed Jesus a direct question concerning spiritual matters. Jesus had been discussing preparing a place for his followers, mentioning they understood the way to where he was heading. Thomas answered with genuine confusion, "Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way?" This question triggered Jesus to deliver one of his most renowned proclamations, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Beyond the biblical records, Thomas's narrative expanded through various apocryphal writings and ancient traditions. The Acts of Thomas, a 3rd-century document, depicted him as a missionary who journeyed to India for spreading Christianity. According to this record, Thomas initially resisted making the journey, yet Jesus appeared to him in a vision and persuaded him to depart. The Indian Association proved especially fascinating because historical evidence indicates that Christian communities genuinely existed in India during the initial few centuries following Jesus' death. The St. Thomas Christians of Kerala trace their beginnings to the apostles' missionary efforts, preserving traditions connecting them directly to Thomas's preaching. Archaeological findings from southern India include ancient crosses and inscriptions supporting the possibility of early Christian existence in that region. Thomas's connection with India acquired special importance when examined alongside the Gospel of Thomas. The text's focus on interior spiritual knowledge and mystical encounter aligned with Indian philosophical traditions. Certain scholars propose that Thomas's alleged missionary activity in India might have shaped his comprehension of Jesus' teachings, producing the distinctive spiritual outlook discovered in the Gospel bearing his name. The matter of Thomas's identity grew even more intricate when certain ancient writings suggested he might have been Jesus' twin brother. The Gospel of Thomas itself opens by naming the author as Didymus Judas Thomas, and certain scholars observed that this name arrangement could signify a family connection. If Thomas truly was Jesus' twin, then his assertion to preserve Jesus' secret sayings would possess special credibility. Early Christian populations held conflicting views regarding Thomas's heritage. Orthodox churches honored his ultimate faith after touching Jesus' wounds, yet they remained doubtful of texts asserting to preserve his independent teachings. The Gospel of Thomas, and additional writings connected with Thomas, frequently promoted varieties of Christianity, emphasizing personal spiritual encounter over institutional control. The geographical distribution of Thomas Christianity proved noteworthy. Communities asserting Thomas as their founder surfaced not solely in India, but likewise in Syria, Mesopotamia, and additional Middle Eastern territories. These communities frequently cultivated distinctive theological outlooks differing from the Christianity emerging within the Roman Empire. Thomas's character within the Gospel of Thomas differs sharply from his depiction in the canonical Gospels. Instead of the doubting disciple requiring physical evidence, Thomas emerges as a spiritual searcher who grasped Jesus' deeper teachings. The text depicts him as someone capable of acknowledging Jesus' genuine nature, stating in one saying, "Master, my mouth is wholly incapable of saying whom you are like." The historical Thomas remains somewhat enigmatic, a figure positioned between biblical records and subsequent legendary elaborations. The canonical Gospels depict him as a contemplative yet skeptical disciple who finally discovered faith through direct encounter. The apocryphal traditions transform him into a missionary champion who transported Christianity to faraway territories and preserved Jesus' most profound teachings. Whether Thomas genuinely authored the Gospel of Thomas remains a debated question among scholars. The text might have been credited to him by subsequent communities desiring to assert apostolic legitimacy for their distinctive teachings. Nevertheless, the link between Thomas and esoteric spiritual understanding proved lasting, shaping Christian mystical traditions across centuries. The designation Thomas the Twin continues evoking mystery and spiritual profundity. His heritage encompasses both the sincere doubt, leading to stronger faith, and the pursuit of hidden wisdom, characterizing early Christian mysticism. Within the desert sands of Egypt, the gospel carrying his name waited with patience to remind the world that the apostle recognized for his doubt was likewise remembered for his unique perception into Jesus's most secret teachings. The landscape of early Christianity. The world producing the Gospel of Thomas bore minimal resemblance to the unified Christianity emerging centuries afterward. During the 1st and 2nd centuries following Jesus' death, his followers dispersed throughout the Mediterranean world, transporting different understandings of his message. Every community cultivated its own comprehension of what following Jesus meant, forming a tapestry of convictions that would ultimately fracture under orthodoxy's pressure. The earliest Christian populations possessed no central power to establish correct belief. Paul's letters, composed merely decades following Jesus' death, already disclosed significant disputes among believers. Certain groups stressed Jesus' Jewish background and demanded that converts adhere to Jewish law. Others, shaped by Paul's instruction, accepted Gentiles without demanding circumcision or dietary limitations. Still others concentrated on mystical encounters and secret knowledge promising direct connection to divine truth. Within Alexandria, Egypt, Christian intellectuals interacted with Greek philosophy, forming sophisticated theological frameworks that merged biblical instruction with Platonic thinking. These scholars generated elegant explanations of how Jesus could be simultaneously human and divine, establishing groundwork for subsequent Orthodox doctrine. Yet they likewise investigated ideas eventually labeled heretical, including the notion that Jesus had disclosed different levels of truth to different disciples. Syrian Christianity evolved along alternative paths, frequently highlighting ascetic disciplines and mystical encounter. Communities within this territory generated texts depicting Jesus as a spiritual instructor who provided liberation from the material realm. The Gospel of Thomas, composed in Greek yet preserved in Coptic, probably originated within this theological atmosphere, where Jesus' sayings were valued as keys to spiritual transformation. Gnostic populations surfaced throughout the Mediterranean, though they resisted simple categorization. These movements generally maintained that the material realm was defective or evil, produced by a lesser deity instead of the true God. They instructed that Jesus had arrived to disclose secret knowledge permitting souls to escape physical existence's prison. Gnostic writings frequently portrayed Jesus as a heavenly revealer who seemed human yet transcended normal physical constraints. Early Christianity's diversity mirrored the broader cultural intricacy of the Roman world. Jewish populations maintained their own understandings of Jesus' importance, frequently viewing him as an instructor or prophet instead of a divine figure. Pagan philosophers discovered certain Christian concepts attractive, especially teachings concerning the soul's connection to the divine. Mystery religions presented competing visions of salvation through ritual initiation and mystical encounter. Rome itself turned into a vital battleground for different Christian groups. The city's Christian population included believers from diverse backgrounds, each bringing their own theological outlooks. House churches distributed throughout the city frequently cultivated distinctive practices and teachings. Some highlighted Jesus' position as a sacrifice for sin, whereas others concentrated on his moral instructions or his promise of spiritual transformation. Early Christianity's theological marketplace produced constant argument and occasional confrontation. Leaders surfaced who asserted special power to interpret Jesus' message, yet their assertions frequently went unacknowledged by other populations. Bishops in major cities such as Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch started claiming broader influence, yet their authority remained confined to their immediate territories. Travel and communication systems permitted different Christian movements to interact, yet these connections frequently intensified tension instead of unity. Letters circulated between populations, sometimes bearing warnings concerning false instructors or dangerous concepts. The identical networks distributing Christian faith likewise transmitted theological conflicts that would ultimately fragment the movement into rival factions. Christian text production accelerated during this period of diversity. Communities formed gospels, acts, letters, and apocalypses, supporting their specific theological outlooks. The Gospel of Thomas surfaced from this creative explosion, presenting a vision of Jesus emphasizing interior spiritual knowledge over external religious practice. Economic and social elements likewise influenced early Christian evolution. Wealthy patrons backed different instructors and populations, occasionally shaping theological direction through their financial support. Artisans and merchants transported Christian concepts along trade pathways, forming networks of believers, sharing occupational connections alongside religious commitments. Persecution by Roman powers affected different Christian populations in differing manners. Certain movements cultivated theologies glorifying martyrdom, whereas others stressed the significance of safeguarding secret teachings for future generations. The Gospel of Thomas, with its concentration on hidden knowledge, might have attracted populations needing to hide their convictions from hostile powers. The intellectual atmosphere of the 2nd century proved especially productive for Christian creativity. Philosophers such as Justin Martyr attempted demonstrating Christianity's compatibility with Greek thinking, whereas others, like Irenaeus, labored to establish clear boundaries between orthodox and heretical instruction. These attempts would ultimately produce the formation of official creeds and canonical scriptures, yet, in the meantime, Christian expression's diversity continued flourishing. Women fulfilled significant positions in numerous early Christian populations, occasionally serving as instructors, prophets, or leaders. The Gospel of Thomas includes sayings mentioning Mary Magdalene and additional women, though these references frequently prove unclear regarding women's spiritual standing. Different populations maintained differing perspectives about gender positions, adding another dimension of complexity to early Christianity's landscape. The world generating the Gospel of Thomas was a realm of spiritual experimentation and theological inventiveness. Communities competed to safeguard and interpret Jesus' genuine message, frequently generating texts asserting apostolic legitimacy for their distinctive teachings. This abundant diversity would ultimately surrender to institutional unity, yet not before producing a remarkable collection of early Christian literature that continues challenging and inspiring readers in our time. Sayings versus stories. The Gospel of Thomas depicts Jesus in a manner feeling almost foreign to readers acquainted with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Where the canonical Gospels recount narratives about Jesus' existence, Thomas presents solely his words. This distinction in structure reflects two entirely different methods of safeguarding and presenting Jesus' importance. The canonical Gospels adhere to a narrative arrangement that biblical scholars term a biographical gospel. These writings describe Jesus' birth, his ministry, his meetings with various individuals, and finally his death and resurrection. The narratives supply context for Jesus' teachings, demonstrating how his words responded to particular situations and obstacles. When Jesus speaks within these Gospels, readers comprehend his meaning through the circumstances prompting his response. Thomas rejects this narrative method completely. The text comprises 114 sayings, each prefaced with the straightforward expression Jesus said. No narratives link these sayings to specific events or discussions. No descriptions clarify where Jesus was when he uttered these words or why he decided to express them. The sayings exist independently, floating free from the biographical particulars anchoring the canonical Gospels. This structure positions Thomas within a category scholars designate a sayings gospel. The hypothetical Q source, which numerous scholars think supplied common material for Matthew and Luke, probably followed a comparable arrangement. Ancient Jewish and Greek literature featured collections of wise sayings credited to renowned teachers, and early Christian populations evidently formed similar collections of Jesus' words. The saying structure fulfills a different function than narrative biography. Narratives about Jesus tend to stress his unique identity and his historical importance. They depict him as a figure who executed miracles, satisfied prophecies, and achieved salvation through his death and resurrection. Readers of these narratives learn about Jesus as someone who acted within history to alter the human condition. Sayings collections, in contrast, concentrate on Jesus as an instructor whose words possess transformative force. They depict him as someone who grasped spiritual truth and could transmit that comprehension to others. Readers of these collections learn from Jesus instead of about him, encountering his teachings as timeless wisdom, transcending specific historical situations. The Gospel of Thomas appears intentionally crafted to stress Jesus' position as a wisdom instructor. Numerous sayings assume the shape of proverbs, puzzles, or paradoxes, inviting contemplation instead of belief. Jesus communicates in metaphors and symbols demanding interpretation, presenting insights revealing their meaning progressively instead of immediately. This method toward Jesus' teachings mirrors a specific comprehension of spiritual transformation. The canonical Gospels typically depict salvation as something Jesus achieved for humanity through his death and resurrection. Believers obtain this salvation by accepting Jesus as their Savior and following his moral instructions. Thomas proposes a different route, one demanding individuals discover spiritual truth through their own interior investigation. The saying's structure likewise permits different degrees of meaning. A single saying might present practical wisdom for daily existence, while simultaneously indicating deeper spiritual truths. Advanced readers could discover profound mystical insights within the identical words that beginners might understand as straightforward moral direction. This layered method toward meaning rendered sayings collections especially valuable for populations emphasizing spiritual growth across time. Oral tradition fulfilled a vital function in preserving and transmitting Jesus' sayings. Prior to written Gospels existing, Christian populations sustained Jesus' teachings through memory and repetition. Sayings proved easier to memorize than extended narratives, and they could be modified to different circumstances while preserving their essential meaning. The Gospel of Thomas might safeguard certain of these oral traditions in their original shape. The connection between sayings and narratives in early Christianity proves intricate. Certain sayings in Thomas seem to be removed from narrative frameworks discovered in the canonical Gospels. Others appear to represent independent traditions, never becoming part of the biographical records. Still others might be subsequent creations cultivated by populations desiring to expand Jesus' teaching to address new spiritual questions. The theological consequences of selecting sayings over narratives extend beyond questions of literary structure. Narrative Gospels tend to stress Jesus' distinctiveness and his position as the exclusive route to salvation. Sayings Gospels can be understood to indicate that Jesus was one among numerous wisdom instructors, albeit an especially talented one. This distinction in presentation contributed to subsequent theological arguments about Jesus' divine character and his connection to additional religious figures. The Gospel of Thomas complicates these distinctions by occasionally featuring sayings asserting Jesus' unique identity. He speaks of himself as the light over all things, and asserts that whoever is near me is near the fire. These declarations indicate divine standing, while preserving the saying structure, stressing his position as an instructor of wisdom. Modern readers frequently discover the saying's structure both demanding and attractive. The absence of narrative framework compels individuals to interact with Jesus' words directly, without the direction supplied by narrative frameworks. This can produce confusion regarding meaning, yet it can likewise generate space for personal understanding and spiritual discovery. The Gospel of Thomas demonstrates that early Christian populations experimented with different methods of safeguarding and presenting Jesus' importance. The selection between sayings and narratives reflected different theological priorities and spiritual disciplines. Populations valuing mystical encounter and personal transformation might have favored sayings collections, whereas those stressing historical faith and communal worship might have preferred narrative Gospels. Thomas's survival alongside the canonical Gospels reminds us that early Christianity encompassed multiple methods of comprehending Jesus' message. The saying structure presents a glimpse into varieties of Christian spirituality, emphasizing interior knowledge and personal transformation over historical faith and institutional control. These different methods toward Jesus' teachings continue shaping Christian thought and practice in our time. Hidden meanings. The Gospel of Thomas communicates in puzzles and paradoxes, appearing crafted to perplex as much as they illuminate. Jesus' words within this text frequently resemble koans from Zen Buddhism, enigmatic declarations resisting straightforward understanding. This mysterious quality mirrors a deliberate teaching approach, emphasizing discovery over explanation. The text opens with a promise and a warning. Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death. This beginning immediately indicates that the sayings hold hidden meanings requiring decoding through careful examination and spiritual perception. The promise of immortality for those comprehending indicates that the hidden meanings involve profound spiritual realities instead of straightforward moral direction. Numerous sayings within Thomas utilize paradox as an instructional instrument. Jesus proclaims, "The first will be last, and they will become one and the same." This declaration inverts normal assumptions about social hierarchy while suggesting a deeper spiritual reality where conventional distinctions lose their significance. The paradox compels readers to look past surface meanings to uncover what Jesus might have intended. The theme of spiritual vision courses throughout the text. Jesus speaks repeatedly concerning seeing, knowing, and comprehending, yet always in manners transcending ordinary perception. He tells his disciples, "There is light within a man of light, and he lights up the whole world. If he does not shine, he is darkness." This saying indicates that spiritual illumination involves discovering an interior source of divine light most individuals never acknowledge. The Gospel of Thomas depicts a vision of spirituality emphasizing self-knowledge as the route to salvation. Jesus proclaims, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This enigmatic declaration indicates that salvation depends on acknowledging and expressing some interior spiritual reality instead of on external religious practice. The text's method toward the kingdom of God diverges dramatically from the canonical Gospels. Instead of portraying the kingdom as a future reality or a physical location, Thomas depicts it as a present spiritual state. Jesus states, "The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you." This saying indicates that the kingdom exists wherever individuals acknowledge their genuine spiritual character. The stress on concealment extends to Jesus' instructional approach itself. He frequently declines to provide direct responses to his disciples' questions, instead presenting enigmatic answers demanding further contemplation. When questioned about the end of the world, Jesus responds, "Have you discovered then the beginning that you look for the end? For where the beginning is, there will the end be." This answer redirects attention from future occurrences to present spiritual comprehension. The Gospel of Thomas addresses material existence with suspicion, though its attitude proves more intricate than straightforward rejection. Jesus cautions against becoming attached to the body and the world, yet he likewise indicates that spiritual truth can be discovered through proper comprehension of material reality. He proclaims, "Blessed is the lion which becomes man when consumed by man, and cursed is the man whom the lion consumes, and the lion becomes man." This puzzling saying appears to address the connection between spiritual and physical existence. The text's depiction of Jesus stresses his position as a revealer of hidden truth, instead of as a sacrifice for sin. Jesus speaks of himself as someone who arrived to disclose secrets concealed since creation's foundation. He asserts to bring fire to the earth and to cast divisions among individuals, indicating that his message would challenge conventional religious comprehension. The Gospel of Thomas features multiple sayings appearing to advocate social inversion. Jesus proclaims, "Many who are first will become last, and they will become one and the same." He likewise indicates that spiritual comprehension might be more accessible to social outcasts than to religious powers. These declarations suggest a variety of spirituality challenging existing power arrangements. The text's method toward gender relations proves especially enigmatic. The final saying quotes Jesus expressing, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit, resembling you males, for every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." This perplexing declaration has produced numerous interpretations, ranging from literal gender transformation to symbolic portrayals of spiritual growth. The stress on secrecy and hidden knowledge within Thomas mirrors broader themes in early Christian mysticism. Numerous early Christian populations maintained that Jesus had disclosed different degrees of truth to different individuals. The most profound spiritual perceptions were reserved for advanced disciples who had demonstrated their readiness to obtain deeper instructions. The Gospel of Thomas indicates that spiritual transformation demands moving past conventional religious categories. Jesus speaks of transcending distinctions between male and female, circumcised and uncircumcised, free and slave. This transcendence appears to involve acknowledging a spiritual reality existing prior to and beyond social and physical distinctions. The text's enigmatic character fulfills a pedagogical function, compelling readers to interact actively with Jesus' teachings instead of accepting them passively. The sayings resist simple understanding, demanding sustained contemplation and spiritual growth. This method assumes that spiritual truth cannot be merely transmitted through clear explanations, yet must be discovered through personal encounter and perception. The hidden meanings within Thomas frequently indicate mystical encounters transcending ordinary consciousness. Jesus speaks of becoming drunk on the bubbling spring he has measured out, indicating states of spiritual intoxication, disclosing hidden truths about reality. These references to altered consciousness link the text to broader traditions of mystical spirituality. The Gospel of Thomas depicts Jesus as an instructor providing access to divine wisdom through careful attention to hidden meanings. The text assumes that spiritual truth lies hidden beneath ordinary experience's surface, waiting to be uncovered by those possessing the perception and persistence to look deeper. This method toward spirituality continues attracting readers seeking direct personal encounter of the divine instead of mediated religious control. Jesus the enigmatic teacher. The Jesus emerging from the Gospel of Thomas bears minimal resemblance to the compassionate healer and moral instructor familiar from the canonical Gospels. Thomas depicts a figure communicating in puzzles, challenging conventional wisdom, and presenting enigmatic insights demanding careful understanding. This Jesus operates more like a spiritual sage than a traditional religious leader. The instructional approach utilized by Jesus in Thomas stresses questions instead of answers. When disciples pose direct questions, Jesus frequently responds with paradoxes or counter-questions, redirecting attention to deeper spiritual matters. This method assumes that genuine comprehension cannot be merely transmitted through explanations, yet must be uncovered through personal perception and spiritual growth. Jesus in Thomas frequently communicates like a philosopher, investigating reality's character. He delivers declarations about opposites' unity, the connection between interior and exterior encounter, and the transcendence of conventional categories. These philosophical observations indicate an instructor who grasped spiritual truth regarding universal principles instead of specific religious teachings. The text depicts Jesus as someone possessing secret knowledge concerning existence's character. He asserts to disclose mysteries concealed from the foundation of the world, indicating that his instructions supplied access to primordial wisdom that had been lost or hidden. This position as a revealer of hidden truth distinguishes the Thomas Jesus from the canonical Jesus, who chiefly presented moral direction and salvation. The Jesus of Thomas displays notable confidence in his spiritual power. He proclaims himself to be the light over all things and asserts that all things came forth from me and all things reached me. These declarations claim a cosmic importance extending past a human instructor's position, indicating someone who grasped himself as intimately linked to existence's divine source. The instructional approach utilized by Jesus and Thomas frequently involves inverting normal assumptions. He proclaims that the last will be first, that those hungry will be filled, and that spiritual wealth arrives through embracing poverty. These inversions compel hearers to question their beliefs about value, success, and spiritual advancement. Jesus in Thomas speaks regularly about the significance of becoming like children. He indicates that spiritual maturity involves recovering the simplicity and directness characterizing childhood consciousness. This stress on childlike awareness exists in tension with the sophisticated philosophical substance of numerous sayings, forming a paradox requiring interpretation itself. The text depicts Jesus as someone comprehending conventional reality's illusory character. He speaks of the world as a corpse and cautions against becoming attached to material existence. Simultaneously, he indicates that proper comprehension of the world can produce spiritual liberation. This nuanced perspective of materiality mirrors instruction neither completely rejecting nor fully embracing physical existence. Jesus, in Thomas, frequently utilizes metaphors extracted from daily existence to illustrate spiritual realities. He speaks of merchants, farmers, builders, and additional ordinary occupations, yet he employs these familiar images to indicate hidden spiritual realities. This instructional approach renders profound truths accessible while simultaneously hiding them from those lacking spiritual perception. The interpersonal dynamics between Jesus and his disciples and Thomas disclose an instructional relationship founded on spiritual growth instead of institutional power. Jesus responds to different disciples according to their comprehension level, presenting more advanced instructions to those displaying greater spiritual maturity. This individualized method assumes that spiritual truth must be communicated differently to different individuals. The Jesus of Thomas displays minimal interest in founding religious institutions or external worship forms. He indicates that genuine spiritual discipline involves interior transformation instead of ritual practice. When questioned about fasting, prayer, and giving alms, Jesus responds with teachings redirecting attention to spiritual attitudes instead of external behaviors. The text depicts Jesus as someone comprehending his physical presence's temporary character. He speaks of disclosing himself to his disciples while he remains with them, yet he likewise indicates that his genuine presence transcends physical form. This comprehension of spiritual presence past physical existence links to broader themes concerning divine reality's character. Jesus, in Thomas, frequently communicates in manners challenging social conventions and religious powers. He indicates that spiritual comprehension might be more accessible to tax collectors and prostitutes than to religious leaders. This preferential choice for social outcasts mirrors instruction valuing spiritual authenticity over social respectability. The emotional quality of Jesus' instruction in Thomas tends toward urgency and intensity. He speaks of bringing fire to the earth and of casting divisions among individuals. These declarations indicate someone comprehending that spiritual truth would necessarily generate conflict with conventional religious and social arrangements. The Jesus of Thomas displays sophisticated comprehension of human psychology and spiritual growth. He acknowledges that individuals resist spiritual truth because it challenges their comfortable beliefs about reality. His instructional approach accounts for this resistance by presenting truth in forms capable of penetrating psychological defenses while progressively transforming consciousness. The text depicts Jesus as someone possessing direct, experiential knowledge of spiritual reality. He communicates with the power of someone who has personally uncovered the truths he instructs instead of someone who has merely learned them from others. This experiential foundation grants his instruction a quality of authenticity transcending mere intellectual comprehension. The Jesus emerging from the Gospel of Thomas presents a vision of spiritual instruction emphasizing personal transformation over institutional religion. His enigmatic approach challenges readers to cultivate their own spiritual perception instead of accepting teachings passively. This method toward spiritual power continues shaping mystical traditions within Christianity and beyond. The kingdom is within you. The most revolutionary instruction in the Gospel of Thomas addresses the location and character of God's kingdom. Where the canonical Gospels frequently depict the kingdom as a future reality arriving through divine intervention, Thomas positions it in the present moment and within human consciousness itself. This perspective shift transforms the entire spiritual pursuit from waiting for external salvation to discovering interior divine reality. Jesus in Thomas proclaims, "The kingdom is inside of you and it is outside of you." This declaration collapses the distinction between interior and exterior reality, indicating that the divine realm exists wherever individuals acknowledge their genuine spiritual character. The kingdom becomes less a location to be entered than a state to be acknowledged and encountered. The text develops this theme through multiple sayings portraying the kingdom's hidden presence in ordinary reality. Jesus tells his disciples, "When you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, so that the male not be male nor the female female, then will you enter the kingdom." This intricate saying indicates that entering the kingdom involves transcending conventional dualities, structuring ordinary consciousness. The division between interior and exterior, above and below, male and female, represents the fragmented awareness, preventing individuals from acknowledging their essential unity with divine reality. Spiritual transformation involves healing these separations and recovering primordial wholeness. The Gospel of Thomas depicts the kingdom as something already existing in its completeness, yet remaining concealed from ordinary perception. Jesus proclaims, "The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it." This saying indicates that divine reality permeates the ordinary world, yet individuals fail acknowledging it because their consciousness functions according to limited perception patterns. The text presents multiple metaphors for the kingdom's hidden presence. Jesus compares it to a treasure concealed in a field, valuable past measure, yet invisible to those unaware where to search. He likewise compares it to a pearl of immense worth, something wise merchants will sacrifice everything to obtain. These metaphors stress both the kingdom's tremendous value and its hidden character. The stress on present availability distinguishes Thomas from apocalyptic traditions stressing the kingdom's future arrival. While the canonical Gospels frequently portray the kingdom as something Jesus will establish through his death and resurrection, Thomas indicates it exists now for those possessing the spiritual perception to acknowledge it. This outlook transforms the spiritual pursuit from waiting for divine intervention to cultivating interior awareness. The Gospel of Thomas links the kingdom's acknowledgement to a process of spiritual awakening involving seeing past conventional reality. Jesus tells his disciples, "Blessed are the eyes which see what you see." This blessing indicates that ordinary perception must be transformed before the kingdom becomes visible. The text implies that most individuals exist in a state of spiritual blindness, preventing them from acknowledging the divine presence surrounding them. The concept of the kingdom within likewise relates to the text's stress on self-knowledge. Jesus proclaims, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." This saying indicates that salvation involves discovering and expressing an interior spiritual reality instead of receiving external assistance. The kingdom within becomes something to be revealed instead of something to be granted. The text depicts the kingdom as both a present reality and a process of ongoing discovery. Jesus speaks of entering the kingdom, yet he likewise portrays it as something spreading and growing. This dynamic quality indicates that kingdom consciousness involves both initial acknowledgement and continued growth. Individuals don't merely arrive at the kingdom, they participate in its ongoing manifestation. The Gospel of Thomas challenges traditional religious categories by indicating that the kingdom transcends institutional boundaries. Jesus proclaims, "I am the light over all things. I am all. From me everything came forth, and unto me everything extends." This cosmic vision indicates that divine reality encompasses all existence, instead of being confined to specific religious populations or disciplines. The text's depiction of the kingdom stresses direct personal encounter over mediated religious power. Jesus tells his disciples, "When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father." This saying indicates that acknowledging the kingdom within involves discovering one's essential identity as a child of God. The Gospel of Thomas depicts the kingdom as something capable of being encountered in ordinary consciousness through proper comprehension. Jesus proclaims, "What you look forward to has already come, but you do not recognize it." This declaration indicates that the kingdom's arrival doesn't demand dramatic external transformations, yet rather a transformation in awareness permitting individuals to perceive what was always present. The text links the kingdom to a state of spiritual unity, transcending ordinary psychological separations. Jesus speaks of making the two one and reconciling opposites as conditions for entering the kingdom. This psychological integration involves healing the fragmented consciousness, preventing individuals from acknowledging their essential wholeness. The stress on the kingdom within likewise relates to the text's comprehension of spiritual power. Instead of positioning divine force in external institutions or religious leaders, Thomas indicates that every individual possesses direct access to the kingdom through their own interior spiritual character. This opening up of spiritual authority presented a challenge to established religious power structures. The Gospel of Thomas depicts the kingdom as something transmittable, something that flows through spiritual instruction. Jesus proclaims, "Anyone who drinks from my mouth shall become as I am. I myself will become that person, and hidden things will be unveiled to them." This particular saying points toward spiritual transformation as a kind of merging of identities between the teacher and the student, a fusion that brings concealed truths into the light. The Gospel's understanding of the kingdom within keeps shaping mystical movements in Christianity and in traditions beyond it. The notion that divine reality dwells inside human consciousness, not in places outside ourselves, has drawn spiritual seekers who prize direct personal encounter above mediation by institutions. This turning inward of the kingdom stands as one of the Gospel of Thomas's most unique and far-reaching contributions. The idea of the kingdom within also touches larger philosophical issues concerning consciousness and the nature of reality itself. When divine reality exists inside human awareness, then the lines separating self from cosmos, the individual from the universal, become porous. This viewpoint indicates that spiritual transformation means recognizing consciousness itself as divine in nature. The Gospel of Thomas portrays the kingdom as simultaneously the aim of spiritual searching and the foundation from which that search emerges. Jesus states the kingdom exists within you and also outside you. This paradoxical declaration implies that the very ability to search for the kingdom proves its presence inside the one who seeks. The text suggests that spiritual yearning itself discloses the divine character of human consciousness, Gnostic or not. The connection between the Gospel of Thomas and Gnosticism stands as one of the most argued questions in scholarship on early Christianity. The text holds elements appearing to match Gnostic motifs, yet it also carries teachings seeming to contradict fundamental Gnostic beliefs about reality and how salvation works. This unclear quality has pushed scholars toward varying conclusions regarding Thomas's theological leaning. Gnosticism, as ancient church fathers such as Irenaeus understood it, involved several core beliefs distinguishing it from Orthodox Christianity. Gnostic systems generally taught that a lesser deity, known as the demiurge, who was either ignorant of or hostile to the true God, created the material world. They held that human souls were fragments of divine light imprisoned in physical bodies, and that salvation meant gaining secret knowledge, enabling souls to escape bodily existence and return to the divine realm. The Gospel of Thomas displays some traits common to Gnostic texts. The focus on secret knowledge shows up in the opening lines, which promise immortality to anyone discovering the interpretation of Jesus' concealed sayings. The text also voices suspicion toward material existence, cautioning against becoming attached to the body and the world. These motifs align with Gnostic worries about the spiritual hazards of material existence. The saying, "If you bring forth what lies within you, what you bring forth will rescue you," echoes Gnostic concepts about the divine spark dwelling within human souls. This statement indicates that salvation involves uncovering and manifesting an inner spiritual reality instead of receiving help from outside. The emphasis on self-knowledge as salvation's pathway reflects Gnostic ideas about the critical importance of recognizing one's authentic divine nature. Yet the Gospel of Thomas also holds elements appearing incompatible with typical Gnostic theology. The text never directly rejects the material world as evil or describes it as a lesser deity's creation. Instead, Jesus speaks of the kingdom as spread out across the earth, indicating that divine reality saturates the physical world rather than standing separate from it. The text's stance toward the Creator God also diverges from standard Gnostic teaching. While Gnostics typically distinguished between the false Creator God and the true Divine Father, Thomas refers consistently to God as Father, without implying any separation between Creator and Redeemer. This unified conception of divine reality creates tension with the elaborate divine hierarchies characterizing most Gnostic systems. The Gospel of Thomas presents Jesus as someone who reveals hidden truth, which matches Gnostic portrayals of Jesus as a divine messenger coming to awaken souls to their true nature. However, the text also includes sayings implying Jesus' unique cosmic importance, declaring that all things emerged from him and returned to him. This elevated Christology exceeds typical Gnostic descriptions of Jesus as one revealer among several. The text's handling of the body and material existence shows more complexity than simple rejection. While Jesus warns against becoming attached to the body, he also implies that spiritual truth can be found through proper comprehension of material reality. The saying about the lion and the man appears to address how spiritual and physical existence relate in ways transcending simple dualism. The Gospel of Thomas includes several sayings appearing to promote ascetic practices common in Gnostic communities. Jesus speaks positively of those who fast from the world and indicates that spiritual development demands renouncing material attachments. These themes connect the text to wider ascetic traditions within early Christianity. The question of Thomas's relationship to Gnosticism grows complicated by the diversity of movements scholars classify as Gnostic. Some Gnostic systems emphasized radical rejection of material existence, while others taught that spiritual truth could be discovered through proper understanding of the created world. The Gospel of Thomas might align with certain forms of Gnosticism, while rejecting others. The text's emphasis on the kingdom within resonates with Gnostic ideas about the divine spark within human souls, but it also connects to Jewish and early Christian traditions about God's presence in human hearts. The saying, "The kingdom exists within you and outside you," points toward a vision of divine reality encompassing both inner and outer dimensions, rather than rejecting the external world entirely. The Gospel of Thomas presents a form of Christianity emphasizing direct spiritual experience above institutional authority, which aligns with Gnostic preferences for personal revelation over church tradition. However, the text also includes sayings suggesting the importance of community and mutual spiritual support, themes less prominent in individualistic Gnostic movements. The scholarly debate about Thomas's Gnostic character reflects wider questions about how to define Gnosticism itself. Some scholars argue for a narrow definition focusing on specific mythological systems, while others prefer a broader understanding, including various forms of esoteric Christianity. The Gospel of Thomas fits more easily into broader definitions of Gnosticism than into narrow ones. The text's portrayal of Jesus as a wisdom teacher, offering access to hidden spiritual truths, connects it to wider traditions of religious esotericism, extending beyond specifically Gnostic movements. Ancient Jewish, Greek, and Christian communities all developed forms of mystical teaching, emphasizing secret knowledge and direct spiritual experience. The Gospel of Thomas might represent a form of early Christian mysticism, sharing certain themes with Gnosticism without fully embracing Gnostic cosmology or theology. The text's emphasis on inner spiritual transformation and its suspicion of external religious authority aligned it with Gnostic concerns while maintaining connections to other forms of early Christian spirituality. The question of whether Thomas is Gnostic ultimately depends on how one defines Gnosticism and how broadly one interprets the text's theological implications. The Gospel of Thomas contains elements suggesting Gnostic influence while also including teachings pointing in other directions. This theological complexity reflects the diverse and experimental nature of early Christian spirituality. Sayings that divide. Certain sayings in the Gospel of Thomas challenge fundamental assumptions underlying the canonical Gospels and traditional Christian theology. These controversial statements reveal alternative understandings of Jesus' message, competing directly with orthodox interpretations. The tensions between Thomas and canonical Christianity become most visible in these divisive sayings. The final saying in Thomas presents one of the most controversial statements in early Christian literature. Jesus declares, "I myself will guide her so as to make her male, enabling her too to become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman making herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." This puzzling statement about gender transformation has sparked intense scholarly debate and feminist criticism. Various interpretations have been proposed for this enigmatic saying. Some scholars suggest that making female male refers to transcending gender distinctions entirely, achieving a spiritual state existing beyond conventional categories of male and female. Others argue the saying reflects ancient beliefs about the spiritual superiority of masculinity, suggesting women must symbolically become male to achieve salvation. The saying creates tension with canonical Gospels, presenting Jesus as welcoming to women and inclusive in his spiritual message. While the canonical Jesus challenges social conventions about gender roles, he doesn't suggest women must become male to enter God's kingdom. This difference in perspective reflects broader disagreements about gender and spiritual authority in early Christian communities. Another controversial saying addresses the question of spiritual authority and religious hierarchy. Jesus declares, "The Pharisees and the scribes have seized the keys of knowledge and concealed them. They themselves have not entered, nor have they permitted those wishing to enter." This statement criticizes religious authorities for blocking access to spiritual truth rather than facilitating it. The canonical Gospels also record Jesus' criticisms of religious leaders, but Thomas presents a more systematic rejection of institutional religious authority. The text suggests that official religious leaders not only fail to grasp spiritual truth, but actively prevent others from discovering it. This perspective appealed to communities feeling marginalized by emerging church hierarchies. The Gospel of Thomas includes sayings appearing to minimize the importance of traditional religious practices. When asked about fasting, prayer, and almsgiving, Jesus responds, "If you fast, you will create sin for yourselves. And if you pray, you will be condemned. And if you give alms, you will harm your spirits." This statement appears to reject practices central to Jewish and early Christian piety. The canonical Gospels present Jesus as someone who participated in traditional religious practices while also challenging their abuse. Jesus fasts, prays, and teaches about generous giving, though he criticizes hypocritical religious observance. Thomas suggests a more radical rejection of external religious practices in favor of inner spiritual transformation. The text's treatment of Jesus' death and resurrection differs markedly from canonical emphasis on these events. While the canonical Gospels structure their entire narratives around Jesus' sacrificial death and victorious resurrection, Thomas mentions neither event. This absence suggests a form of Christianity finding Jesus' significance in his teaching rather than in his death. The Gospel of Thomas presents Jesus as a revealer of hidden wisdom rather than as a sacrifice for sin. This perspective challenges the substitutionary atonement theology becoming central to Orthodox Christianity. The text suggests salvation comes through understanding Jesus' teaching rather than through faith in his death and resurrection. Several sayings in Thomas appear to promote a form of realized eschatology, contradicting future-oriented expectations found in the canonical Gospels. Jesus declares, "What you look forward to has already arrived, but you do not recognize it." This statement suggests that the salvation and kingdom other Gospels locate in the future are actually present realities requiring recognition rather than waiting. The canonical Gospels maintain tension between the kingdom's present reality and its future consummation. They suggest Jesus' ministry inaugurated the kingdom, but that its full manifestation awaits his return. Thomas resolves this tension by locating the kingdom entirely in present experience, challenging Christian hope for future resurrection and cosmic transformation. The text includes sayings appearing to de-emphasize the importance of Jesus' unique identity in favor of his teaching. While Thomas does include statements about Jesus' cosmic significance, it also suggests disciples can achieve the same spiritual status as their teacher. Jesus declares, "Anyone who drinks from my mouth will become as I am. I myself will become that person." The canonical Gospels maintain a clear distinction between Jesus' divine nature and his disciples' human nature. While believers can be transformed through relationship with Jesus, they don't become identical to him. Thomas suggests a more fluid understanding of spiritual identity, allowing greater convergence between teacher and student. The Gospel of Thomas presents a vision of Christianity emphasizing inner spiritual knowledge above external religious authority. This perspective challenges the institutional developments occurring in early Christian communities, particularly the emergence of episcopal authority and creedal orthodoxy. The text suggests spiritual truth is accessible to individuals through direct experience rather than through church mediation. The sayings that divide in Thomas reflect broader tensions within early Christianity about the nature of spiritual authority, the role of religious institutions, and the meaning of salvation. These alternative perspectives were eventually marginalized through the development of Orthodox Christianity, but they continue to influence Christian thought and practice. The controversial sayings in Thomas reveal the diversity and complexity of early Christian spirituality. They demonstrate that communities interpreted Jesus' message in ways differing significantly from what would become Orthodox Christianity. These differences reflect genuine theological disagreements rather than simple misunderstandings. The Gospel of Thomas preserves voices from early Christian communities, emphasizing mystical experience, individual spiritual development, and resistance to institutional authority. The sayings dividing modern readers also divided ancient communities, contributing to the theological conflicts shaping the development of Orthodox Christianity. Authority in question. Picture the early Christian world as a house with many rooms, each filled with different voices claiming to speak for Jesus. In one room, bishops gather around marble tables, their robes heavy with authority. In another, wandering teachers sit cross-legged on dusty floors, speaking in riddles. The Gospel of Thomas walks between these rooms, quietly challenging everyone inside. Traditional Christianity built itself on pillars of apostolic succession. Peter received the keys to heaven. The 12 disciples formed the foundation. Bishops traced their authority back through an unbroken chain to Jesus himself. This created a pyramid of power, with God at the top, flowing down through Christ, then the apostles, then bishops, then priests, then the faithful below. Thomas disrupts this entire structure. The Gospel presents Jesus directly to seekers, bypassing all intermediaries. No bishops needed, no priests required, no church hierarchy necessary. The divine spark lives within each person, waiting to be discovered. This teaching cuts straight through the careful architecture of institutional power. Consider saying 13, where Jesus tells Thomas he has drunk from the bubbling spring and become intoxicated with the divine. Thomas cannot even speak about what he has learned because it transcends ordinary language. Here Jesus bypasses the other disciples entirely, speaking soul to soul with Thomas. The message rings clear. Direct experience trumps borrowed authority. The canonical Gospels carefully preserve the special status of the 12. Even when they stumble or doubt, they remain chosen vessels. Thomas, the Gospel, treats the disciples differently. They often appear confused, missing the deeper meanings. In saying 43, the disciples ask Jesus who he is, and he responds with gentle exasperation, wondering why they still seek external answers when truth dwells within them. This creates a fundamental tension. If anyone can access divine wisdom directly, what need exists for religious gatekeepers? If the kingdom spreads invisibly across the earth, why build cathedrals? If God speaks through inner knowing, why require scriptures? Thomas poses these questions not through argument, but through lived example. The gospel structure reinforces this anti-hierarchical message. Unlike the canonical Gospels, which follow Jesus from birth to death, Thomas presents 114 sayings without clear order or narrative progression. Readers must find their own path through the teachings. No guide explains the meanings. No authority interprets the mysteries. Each person encounters the text alone, just as each soul must discover its own divine nature. Early church leaders recognized the threat. If Thomas gained acceptance, their carefully constructed authority would crumble. The pyramid would collapse into a circle where every voice carried equal weight. Instead of shepherds leading flocks, spiritual equals would share discoveries. The very concept of orthodoxy would become meaningless. Thomas also challenges the emerging concept of apostolic witness. The canonical Gospels emphasize that the disciples saw Jesus perform miracles, heard his teachings, and witnessed his resurrection. This direct experience gave them unique authority to speak about Jesus. Thomas undermines this by suggesting inner revelation surpasses external witnessing. The Gospel's famous saying 52 illustrates this perfectly. When the disciples mention the 24 prophets who spoke before Jesus, he responds that they have abandoned the living one in favor of the dead. True spiritual authority comes not from inheriting ancient wisdom but from discovering present truth. The past cannot contain the infinite. This teaching threatened the entire biblical tradition. If present inner knowing outweighs scriptural authority, then centuries of accumulated wisdom become secondary. Prophets, patriarchs, and apostles all step aside for the immediate experience of divine presence. The canon itself becomes optional rather than essential. Thomas presents Jesus as a teacher who destroys the very concept of discipleship. Rather than creating followers, he awakens equals. Rather than establishing a church, he dissolves the barriers between sacred and ordinary. Rather than founding a religion, he points beyond all religions to the source they dimly reflect. The political implications were staggering. Early Christianity was already struggling to define itself against Roman authority, Jewish tradition, and pagan philosophy. Internal unity seemed essential for survival. Thomas pulled in the opposite direction, encouraging individual spiritual exploration over collective identity. This made it dangerous, not just theologically, but practically. Church leaders faced a choice: embrace Thomas and risk chaos, or reject it and maintain order. They chose order, but the cost was enormous. By silencing Thomas, they also silenced a vision of Christianity trusting ordinary people to find God without intermediaries. The religion that emerged was safer, but smaller, more controlled, but less mysterious. The irony runs deep. In rejecting Thomas to preserve apostolic authority, the Church Fathers exercised the very institutional power Thomas questioned. They became the gatekeepers they claimed to serve, deciding which voices could speak for Jesus and which must remain silent. The pyramid of authority defended itself by burying the circular alternative: banned, buried, forgotten. The letter arrives on expensive papyrus, sealed with the bishop's ring. Irenaeus of Lyons sits in his study, surrounded by scrolls and codices, crafting words that will echo through centuries. The year is around 180 CE, and he faces a crisis. Too many gospels, too many voices, too many versions of Jesus. The church needs clarity, and clarity requires choices. Irenaeus picks up his reed pen and begins writing Against Heresies, a massive work that will define Orthodox Christianity for generations. Among his targets, the Gospel of Thomas. He dismisses it as a collection of dangerous secrets, a text leading believers away from the true faith. With these words, he begins the long process of burial. The early church faced an impossible challenge. Dozens of Gospels circulated through Christian communities. Some told familiar stories about Jesus' birth, ministry, and death. Others, like Thomas, offered radically different approaches. Market forces couldn't determine which survived. Only authority could make that choice. The process unfolded gradually. First came influential voices like Irenaeus, who argued that only 4 Gospels deserved acceptance, like the 4 corners of the earth or the 4 winds of heaven: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, provided perfect completeness. Any additional gospel disrupted this divine symmetry. Church councils followed, meeting in grand halls to debate which books belonged in the biblical canon. The Muratorian fragment, dating to around 200 CE, lists accepted texts. Thomas doesn't appear. The message grows clear. This gospel has no place in Orthodox Christianity. But books don't disappear simply because bishops disapprove. Thomas continued circulating in certain communities, copied by hand and shared in secret. Gnostic groups particularly treasured it, seeing in its mysterious sayings confirmation of their own spiritual insights. The text lived on in the shadows. The tide turned decisively in the 4th century. Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, transforming it from persecuted sect to imperial religion. This brought unprecedented power, but also unprecedented pressure for uniformity. The empire needed one Christianity, not many competing versions. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE focused on theological doctrine rather than biblical canon, but it established the principle that church authorities could determine correct belief. Later councils applied this principle to Scripture itself. The 27 books of the New Testament gradually emerged as the definitive collection. Thomas fell victim to this process, not because it lacked spiritual value, but because it threatened institutional control. The Gospel's emphasis on individual revelation clashed with the Church's need for unified authority. Its mysterious sayings resisted the kind of systematic interpretation Orthodox theology required. The suppression took multiple forms. Bishops instructed their congregations to avoid suspicious texts. Scribes stopped copying unapproved Gospels. Libraries refused to preserve them. The economics of manuscript production worked against Thomas. Why spend precious resources on forbidden books when approved texts filled every need? More aggressive measures followed. Church authorities ordered the destruction of heretical writings. Bonfires consumed centuries of spiritual exploration. Thomas manuscripts disappeared into flames or were buried in sealed jars, hidden by believers who couldn't bear to see them destroyed. The Nag Hammadi discovery in 1945 revealed the extent of this ancient book burning. 13 leather-bound codices, buried around 350 CE, contained 52 texts Orthodox Christianity had tried to erase. Among them, a complete Coptic version of the Gospel of Thomas. The timing suggests deliberate preservation as persecution intensified. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. The monasteries near Nag Hammadi were being converted to Orthodox Christianity in the mid-4th century. Monks faced a choice: surrender their beloved texts or hide them. They chose hiding, perhaps hoping future generations would prove more tolerant. The burial location itself tells a story. The jars were placed near ancient pagan tombs, in ground already considered sacred but outside Christian control. The monks couldn't bear to destroy Thomas, but they couldn't openly preserve it either. Underground became the only option. As centuries passed, Thomas faded from memory. Medieval Christianity occasionally referenced it, usually to condemn its teachings. Scholars knew the name but lacked the text. The gospel became a ghost, haunting the edges of Christian history without substance. The Protestant Reformation offered a brief opportunity for rediscovery. Reformers challenged church authority and returned to ancient sources, but they focused on the canonical New Testament, not the broader world of early Christian literature. Thomas remained buried, both literally and metaphorically. Even when 19th century scholars began recovering early Christian texts, they found only fragments of Thomas. A few Greek papyri preserved scattered sayings, but these glimpses only deepened the mystery. The complete gospel remained hidden beneath Egyptian sand. The irony cuts deep. By trying to eliminate Thomas, church authorities may have preserved it. The manuscript that survived did so precisely because believers buried it beyond the reach of Orthodox suppression. The very act of hiding became an act of salvation. This pattern repeated throughout Christian history. Mystics and dissidents treasured Thomas-like insights even when they lacked the text itself. The Gospel's spirit lived on in medieval mystics, Renaissance humanists, and modern spiritual seekers. The message proved harder to bury than the manuscript. The 20th century brought dramatic change. Archaeological discoveries, scholarly freedom, and spiritual experimentation created new openness to alternative Christian voices. The ground became fertile for Thomas to bloom again. But first, someone needed to dig it up. The lost years. Darkness settles over the ancient text like sand drifting across forgotten tombs. The Gospel of Thomas enters a long sleep, buried beneath centuries of silence. Yet, even in darkness, seeds of influence scatter on invisible winds, taking root in unexpected places. The 4th century closes, with Thomas officially forgotten. Church libraries purge their collections. Scriptoriums stop copying the text. The last believers who treasured it grow old and die without passing it to the next generation. The gospel becomes a whisper, then silence. But whispers have their own power. Medieval Christianity develops a rich mystical tradition echoing Thomas-like themes. Meister Eckhart speaks of the God within, the divine spark dwelling in every soul. Julian of Norwich writes about the love surrounding us, invisible but everywhere present. These mystics never read Thomas, yet their insights mirror its deepest teachings. The connection runs deeper than coincidence. Early Christian mysticism drew from the same wells, nourishing Thomas. Direct experience of the divine, union with the source of all being. The priority of inner knowing over external authority. These streams flowed underground, surfacing in unexpected places. Islamic mysticism, developing in the same Mediterranean world, preserved similar insights. Sufi poets like Rumi spoke of the beloved dwelling within the lover's heart. The divine presence Thomas described as hidden yet everywhere became the breath of Islamic spirituality. Different words, same recognition. Jewish mysticism contributed its own threads. The Kabbalah spoke of hidden light concealed within creation, waiting for seekers to discover it. The Zohar described a reality where the divine and human interpenetrate completely. These teachings would have resonated deeply with Thomas readers, had any survived to make the connection. The Renaissance brought new possibilities. Humanist scholars began recovering ancient texts, driven by curiosity about Christianity's origins. They found fragments of Thomas in old libraries, tantalizing glimpses of a lost gospel. But these pieces were too scattered to reconstruct the whole. Erasmus, the great Dutch humanist, compiled early versions of the New Testament, but focused on canonical texts. He knew about other gospels but lacked access to complete manuscripts. The tools for recovery existed, but the materials remained buried. The Protestant Reformation created additional opportunities. Reformers challenged church authority and returned to ancient sources. They might have embraced Thomas as evidence of diverse early Christianity. Instead, they focused on the canonical scriptures, seeking solid ground for their own authority. The moment passed. Colonial expansion brought Western scholars into contact with Eastern Christianity. Coptic Christians in Egypt preserved ancient traditions predating Islam. Some remembered stories about hidden gospels, manuscripts buried in the desert, but these were treated as legends rather than historical possibilities. The 18th century Enlightenment fostered new interest in Christian origins. Scholars began applying critical methods to biblical texts, questioning traditional authorship and dating. They created space for recovering lost voices, but archaeological techniques remained primitive. The desert kept its secrets. German scholarship in the 19th century pioneered historical critical methods. Researchers traced the development of early Christianity, identifying different streams and influences. They recognized that the canonical Gospels represented only one branch of a much larger tree. But they worked with fragments, not complete texts. The discovery of the Oxyrhynchus papyri in Egypt revealed Greek fragments of Thomas, but scholars initially failed to recognize them. The sayings seemed too isolated to reconstruct a complete gospel. Only later, after the Nag Hammadi discovery, would these pieces fall into place. Meanwhile, spiritual movements in the West independently developed Thomas-like insights. Transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson spoke of the divine within each person. Theosophists explored hidden wisdom traditions. New Thought advocates proclaimed the power of consciousness to transform reality. These groups would have found Thomas deeply congenial. The early 20th century brought dramatic archaeological discoveries. The Dead Sea Scrolls revealed Jewish sectarian texts predating Christianity. Gnostic codices surfaced in Egypt, preserving alternative Christian traditions. The ancient world was returning to life, piece by piece. Scholars began reconstructing the complex world of early Christianity. They discovered the movement was far more diverse than traditional accounts suggested. Multiple competing groups claimed to follow Jesus. Different gospels circulated in different communities. The canonical scriptures represented one stream among many. This scholarly revolution created perfect conditions for Thomas to return. The academic world was ready to receive alternative gospels. The general public was increasingly interested in spiritual traditions outside mainstream Christianity. The cultural moment was ripe for rediscovery, but the text itself remained hidden. Generations of scholars had theorized about lost gospels without being able to read them. The Gospel of Thomas existed in fragments and references, traces of a vanished world. The complete manuscript slept undisturbed beneath Egyptian sand. The irony was profound. Just as the modern world became ready to embrace Thomas, the ancient world's efforts to suppress it remained completely successful. The gospel existed in potential, waiting for the right moment to emerge. All the necessary conditions were in place, except one. Someone needed to dig it up. The stage was set for one of archaeology's greatest discoveries. The tools existed. The scholarly framework was ready. The cultural appetite was enormous. Thomas had survived its burial. Now it needed its resurrection. Modern resurrection. The jar cracks open with a sound like breaking centuries. Muhammad Ali al-Salman brushes away the dust of ages, revealing papyrus pages that haven't seen sunlight since the Roman Empire. The year is 1945, and the Gospel of Thomas is about to return to the world. The discovery unfolds like a story designed by Providence. A peasant farmer searching for fertilizer stumbles upon the greatest literary treasure of the 20th century. 13 leather-bound codices, buried near ancient monasteries, containing 52 texts Orthodox Christianity tried to erase. Among them, complete at last, the Gospel of Thomas. The manuscripts begin their journey through the antiquities market, passing from hand to hand like stolen flames. Dealers in Cairo recognize their value without understanding their significance. European collectors acquire fragments, driven by the thrill of owning ancient secrets. The codices scatter across the globe, each piece carrying part of a revolutionary story. Scholars slowly piece together what has been found. The Coptic language yields to patient translation, word by word, saying by saying. The Gospel of Thomas emerges from its long silence. The academic world holds its breath as the full implications become clear. This is not just another ancient text. This is a complete early Christian gospel, preserved in its entirety, offering a radically different vision of Jesus and his teachings. The discovery rewrites the history of Christianity. Everything scholars thought they knew about the early church suddenly becomes questionable. The text reaches publication in the 1950s, and the response is immediate. Biblical scholars dive into detailed analysis, comparing Thomas with the canonical Gospels. They discover many sayings parallel material in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The relationship between these texts becomes a new frontier of research. Some scholars argue Thomas preserves early traditions predating the canonical Gospels. Others maintain it represents a later development influenced by Gnostic thought. The debate ignites conferences, fills journals, and launches academic careers. Thomas becomes the most studied non-canonical text in Christian history. But the Gospel's impact extends far beyond academic circles. The 1960s counterculture embraces Thomas as validation of their spiritual seeking. Here is a Jesus who speaks in riddles, who encourages direct experience over institutional authority, who locates the divine within rather than above. The hippie movement finds its gospel. Religious seekers discover in Thomas a Christianity they can accept. The text offers spirituality without dogma, mystery without hierarchy, wisdom without commandments. People who have left traditional churches find in Thomas a bridge back to the sacred. The gospel becomes a catalyst for alternative spirituality. The feminist movement claims Thomas as an ally. The gospel's treatment of Mary Magdalene as a spiritual equal challenges patriarchal interpretations of Christianity. The text's emphasis on inner authority undermines male religious hierarchies. Thomas becomes a weapon in the battle for women's spiritual equality. Popular culture embraces the gospel's mystical atmosphere. Movies reference its sayings. Musicians set its words to music. Artists find inspiration in its enigmatic imagery. Thomas enters the cultural bloodstream, influencing creators who may never read the full text. The New Age movement adopts Thomas as a core text. Its teachings about hidden divine nature align perfectly with metaphysical spirituality. The gospel's emphasis on self-knowledge resonates with therapeutic culture. Thomas becomes a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern psychology. Academic conferences multiply as scholars grapple with Thomas's implications. The Gospel of Thomas seminar becomes a regular feature at biblical studies meetings. International symposiums draw researchers from around the world. The text generates more scholarship than many canonical books. Publishers recognize the market potential. New translations appear regularly, each claiming to capture the Gospel's true meaning. Study guides help general readers navigate the difficult sayings. Commentary series multiply, offering different perspectives on the text's significance. The Internet age amplifies Thomas's reach exponentially. Websites devoted to the Gospel appear by the hundreds. Online discussion groups debate the meaning of individual sayings. Digital libraries make the text available to anyone with an Internet connection. Thomas achieves global accessibility. Modern translations proliferate, each reflecting different scholarly and spiritual perspectives. Some emphasize the text's mystical dimensions, others highlight its social radicalism. Still, others focus on its historical significance. The Gospel multiplies into many versions, each speaking to different audiences. The text faces new challenges in the digital age. Conspiracy theorists claim it contains hidden codes. Sensationalist writers exaggerate its anti-church message. Popular books make claims serious scholars reject. Thomas becomes a battleground between scholarship and speculation. Yet the Gospel's core message remains unchanged. Direct experience of the divine trumps borrowed authority. The kingdom of God dwells within and around us. Spiritual seeking requires no intermediaries. These insights prove as revolutionary in the 21st century as they were in the second. The resurrection continues as each new generation discovers Thomas. College students encounter it in religious studies courses. Spiritual seekers find it in meditation groups. Scholars uncover new layers of meaning. The Gospel, that was buried for 16 centuries, enjoys a second life that may prove more influential than its first. The scholars at war. The conference room crackles with intellectual tension. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the faces of biblical scholars who have spent decades studying the Gospel of Thomas. Coffee grows cold as passionate arguments unfold. The year is 1985, and the academic world is divided. Elaine Pagels takes the podium first. Her Princeton credentials lend weight to her words. She sees in Thomas a window into early Christian diversity, a time when multiple communities claim Jesus as their own. The Gospel represents authentic early tradition, she argues, possibly predating the canonical Gospels. Thomas offers a Christianity valuing personal spiritual experience over institutional authority. Her argument builds carefully. The sayings in Thomas often appear in simpler form than their canonical parallels. This suggests they might preserve earlier versions of Jesus' teachings. The Gospel's structure as a collection of sayings matches what scholars theorize about the Q source, the hypothetical document Matthew and Luke used alongside Mark. Pagels emphasizes Thomas's spiritual sophistication. The Gospel doesn't present Jesus as a dying Savior, but as a wisdom teacher helping others discover their own divine nature. This approach resonates with educated audiences who struggle with traditional Christianity's emphasis on sin and salvation through Christ's death. The room stirs as Marvin Meyer rises to respond. His work on Gnostic texts has convinced him that Thomas belongs to the 2nd century, not the 1st. The Gospel reflects developed Gnostic thought, he argues, not primitive Christian teaching. Its emphasis on secret knowledge and inner divinity aligns with later mystical movements. Meyer points to specific sayings echoing Gnostic themes. The Gospel's treatment of the material world as inferior to the spiritual realm mirrors Gnostic dualism. Its emphasis on escaping the body and returning to the divine source follows Gnostic mythology. Thomas reads like a Gnostic text because it is one. The debate intensifies as Bart Ehrman takes the floor. His expertise in early Christian manuscripts brings a different perspective. He argues Thomas represents a later development influenced by Syrian Christianity and Gnostic thought. The Gospel's sayings may sound primitive, but this reflects deliberate archaizing rather than authentic antiquity. Ehrman dissects the manuscript evidence. The earliest Greek fragments of Thomas date to around 200 CE, already showing signs of textual development. The complete Coptic version is even later, translated from Greek originals that may themselves be copies of copies. The transmission history suggests a text that evolved over time. He challenges the assumption that simpler equals earlier. Ancient authors often simplified complex traditions for theological or practical reasons. Thomas's sayings may appear primitive because the author wanted to emphasize Jesus's essential teachings, not because they preserve the original form. April DeConnick enters the fray with data that changes everything. Her comprehensive analysis of Thomas's language and structure reveals layers of composition. The Gospel wasn't written all at once, but grew through stages, accumulating sayings from different sources and periods. DeConnick's work suggests Thomas began as a collection of authentic early sayings, but was later expanded by mystical interpreters. The original kernel may indeed predate the canonical Gospels, but the final form reflects 2nd century spiritual concerns. Both sides of the debate can claim partial victory. Her linguistic analysis reveals different editorial hands. Some sayings use simple, concrete language, sounding very much like the historical Jesus. Others employ abstract mystical terminology reflecting later theological development. The Gospel is neither purely early nor purely late, but a complex composite. The scholarly community splits into camps. The early Thomas advocates see the Gospel as a window into primitive Christianity. The late Thomas supporters view it as a 2nd century mystical development. The complex Thomas position recognizes both early and late elements. Each camp marshals evidence to support its position. Early advocates point to parallels with Q material and the Gospel's simple format. Late supporters emphasize Gnostic themes and manuscript dating. Complex position holders trace the text's editorial history. The debate spreads beyond academic circles. Popular books champion different positions, often with more certainty than the evidence warrants. Elaine Pagels becomes a media favorite, her arguments reaching millions through documentaries and best-selling books. The Gospel of Thomas becomes a cultural phenomenon. Conservative scholars push back, arguing Thomas represents a heretical deviation from authentic Christianity. They emphasize the Gospel's exclusion from the canon and its conflict with Orthodox teaching. The text becomes a battleground between traditional and progressive Christianity. International scholarship adds new voices. European scholars bring different methodological approaches. Middle Eastern researchers offer insights from regional traditions. The debate becomes global, with conferences in multiple languages. Feminist scholars highlight the Gospel's treatment of gender issues. Liberation theologians find support for their emphasis on spiritual equality. Mystical interpreters celebrate the text's emphasis on inner experience. Each group finds in Thomas what they seek. The internet age multiplies the voices. Online forums buzz with amateur theories. Bloggers advocate for their favorite interpretations. Social media amplifies both scholarly insights and popular misconceptions. The debate becomes democratized and chaotic. Recent discoveries continue to fuel the controversy. New manuscript fragments provide additional evidence. Archaeological findings illuminate the world that produced Thomas. Each new piece of data requires scholars to reconsider their positions. The war of interpretation reflects deeper questions about Christian origins. Was early Christianity diverse or unified? Did Jesus teach esoteric wisdom or public salvation? Can modern spirituality learn from ancient alternatives? Thomas becomes a symbol for these larger debates, the voice of the margins. The meditation hall falls silent as the teacher opens an ancient text. Fluorescent lights dim to candle glow. Urban seekers settle into lotus position, their smartphones silenced for an hour of spiritual exploration. The Gospel of Thomas has found its modern congregation. These aren't traditional Christians. They carry wounds from rigid childhoods, disappointments with institutional religion, questions Sunday school couldn't answer. They've wandered through Buddhism, yoga, New Age workshops, and therapy sessions. Now they discover Jesus speaking in a voice they've never heard before. The teacher reads saying 70, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have will destroy you." Heads nod in recognition. This sounds like the wisdom they've been seeking, not guilt and commandments, but invitation and possibility. Thomas becomes a bridge for the spiritually homeless. People who love Jesus but reject churches find in this gospel a path back to the sacred. The text offers Christianity without the institutional baggage. Here is a Jesus who sounds more like a Zen master than a moral judge. The appeal cuts across demographic lines. Former Catholics discover a mystical Christianity honoring their contemplative instincts. Protestant refugees find wisdom without dogma. Secular seekers encounter a Jesus they can respect. The gospel creates space for spiritual exploration without religious commitment. Women particularly embrace Thomas's alternative vision. The Gospel's treatment of Mary Magdalene as a spiritual equal challenges patriarchal Christianity. Its emphasis on inner authority undermines male religious hierarchies. Here is a Jesus who doesn't require submission, but encourages discovery. The LGBTQ+ community finds in Thomas a refuge from condemnation. The Gospel's focus on spiritual unity transcends social categories. Its vision of divine presence within everyone offers dignity to people rejected by traditional churches. Thomas becomes a safe harbor for religious exiles. Interfaith seekers appreciate the Gospel's mystical universalism. Its teachings about inner divine nature resonate with Hindu concepts of Atman. Its emphasis on direct experience echoes Buddhist mindfulness. Its vision of hidden kingdom aligns with Sufi spirituality. Thomas becomes a meeting ground for wisdom traditions. Academic burnouts discover in Thomas a spirituality honoring intellectual honesty. The Gospel's enigmatic sayings resist simple interpretation, requiring thoughtful engagement. Its refusal to offer easy answers appeals to people who've grown tired of religious certainty. Here is faith that embraces mystery. The text attracts people in transition. Midlife seekers questioning their life choices find in Thomas permission to explore inner landscapes. Young adults rejecting their parents' religion discover an alternative Christian path. Elderly people preparing for death encounter teachings about eternal life that don't require belief in specific doctrines. Thomas speaks to therapeutic culture. Its emphasis on self-knowledge aligns with psychological healing. Its teachings about bringing forth what is within sound like recovery wisdom. The Gospel becomes a spiritual companion for people working through trauma and transformation. The environmental movement finds in Thomas a different relationship with the natural world. The Gospel's vision of divine presence everywhere, including in split wood and lifted stones, offers an alternative to Christianity's reputation for environmental neglect. Here is a Jesus who sees the sacred in material creation. Artists and writers gravitate toward Thomas's poetic language. The Gospel's enigmatic sayings spark creative interpretation. Its mysterious imagery inspires paintings, poems, and songs. The text becomes a muse for people seeking to express the ineffable. The marginalized find in Thomas a voice for their experience. The Gospel's inversions of social norms speak to people outside mainstream culture. Its emphasis on hidden wisdom validates knowledge coming from suffering. Here is a Jesus who understands life on the edges. Recovery communities discover in Thomas a spirituality not requiring traditional religious commitment. The Gospel's emphasis on transformation without judgment appeals to people healing from addiction. Its teachings about finding the divine within offer hope without shame. The text becomes a resource for spiritual direction. Contemplative guides use Thomas's sayings as meditation focuses. Retreat centers offer workshops on the Gospel's mystical teachings. The ancient text finds new life in modern spiritual practice. Online communities have grown and multiplied around the interpretation of Thomas. Discussion forums are alive, with conversations about the more challenging sayings. Groups on social media platforms share their personal revelations and insights. This gospel has become a central focal point for those pursuing digital forms of spirituality. The attraction reaches far beyond solitary seekers to encompass entire communities. Churches embracing alternative Christianity have woven Thomas into their practices of worship. Groups dedicated to interfaith understanding utilize the gospel as shared territory. This ancient text is creating entirely new expressions of religious community. Professionals working in mental health have found within Thomas a valuable resource for spiritual well-being. The gospel's focus on inner knowing gives validation to personal experience. The teachings it contains about discovering peace from within carry therapeutic significance. Here lies ancient wisdom that supports the healing practices of our modern world. Traditional Christians have leveled criticism at the text, viewing it as a form of dangerous deception. They contend that Thomas draws people away from what they consider authentic faith. The gospel has transformed into a contested ground between institutional Christianity and alternative expressions of the faith. Still, the stream of those seeking continues its flow toward Thomas. In our world marked by religious polarization, this gospel presents a different kind of possibility. Not about conversion, but rather about discovery. Not about submission, but instead about exploration. Not providing answers, but offering better questions. Through Thomas, the voice from the margins speaks to a world that hungers for authentic expressions of spirituality. The gospel that lay buried for 16 centuries has at last discovered its true audience. These are people searching for God beyond the boundaries of conventional religious structures. The Sayings in Detail, Part 1. Morning light comes filtering through the windows of the monastery as we turn to the Gospel of Thomas to examine its most treasured teachings. Every saying bears the weight of the centuries, worn smooth by the countless seekers who have discovered in these words an entrance to the divine. Saying 3 rises like the sun over hills from ancient times. If those who lead you should say, "Look, the kingdom exists in the sky," then the birds of the air will get there before you. If they tell you, "It exists in the sea," then the fish will arrive ahead of you. Instead, the kingdom exists within you, and it exists outside you. Imagine Jesus seated beside the Sea of Galilee, observing fishermen as they cast out their nets while birds circle in the sky overhead. A disciple poses a question about where heaven might be located, and Jesus makes gestures toward the water, toward the sky, and then rests his hand upon his heart. This particular saying demolishes the conventional geography of religion. The kingdom is not some faraway location that requires maps or guides to reach. It resides in the space where breath happens, between one heartbeat and the next, in that awareness which observes its own act of observing. Jesus directs attention beyond the horizontal plane of searching toward the vertical dimension, toward presence itself. The teaching proceeds, "When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will understand that you are the children of the living Father." Knowledge of self becomes the key unlocking divine relationship. Not the surface self defined by roles and narratives, but that deeper self existing before names were given and continuing after death, arrives. Saying 22 unfolds with the complexity of a parable nested within another parable. When you transform the two into one, and when you make what is inner like what is outer, and what is outer like what is inner, and what is upper like what is lower, and when you transform male and female into a single one, such that the male will not remain male, nor will the female remain female, then you will enter into the kingdom. Picture Jesus addressing a gathering where divisions run deep through the social fabric. Men and women occupy separate spaces. The wealthy and the poor display their differences through clothing. Those focused on religion and those focused on the secular world carry contrasting assumptions. The teaching issues a call for radical integration, not the erasing of differences, but their transcendence. The kingdom comes into being when opposites recognize their concealed unity. The reality of the internal and the reality of the external merge into wholeness without seams. The divine masculine and the divine feminine move together in perfect balance. This saying presents a challenge to every variety of spiritual dualism. Heaven and earth are not separate domains, but rather different aspects of one reality. The sacred and the secular collapse together into integrated existence. The one who seeks and that which is sought reveal themselves as facets of the same mystery. Saying 42 stands by itself in its remarkable brevity. Be passers-by. Imagine Jesus observing pilgrims making their way toward Jerusalem, their backs curved beneath heavy packs, their expressions fixed on distant destinations. With just 2 words, he turns the entire journey upside down. And this teaching proposes that attachment to any position, any belief, or any identity places limits on spiritual freedom. Even the attachment to seeking itself must be let go. The kingdom is the inheritance of those who travel with light burdens, who maintain a gentle hold on all experiences, who stay open to transformation without end. This saying addresses itself directly to modern consumers of spirituality who gather teachings the way tourists collect souvenirs. Thomas indicates a different approach. Make contact, but avoid grasping. Absorb lessons, but resist hoarding. Encounter experiences, but refuse to cling. The path demands becoming without a path. Saying 50 unveils the cosmic dimension of identity. If they should ask you, where did you come from? Respond to them, we came from the light. From that place where the light brought itself into being, where it established itself, and where it manifested in their image. If they ask you, is it you? Respond, we are the children of that light, and we are the chosen ones of the living Father. Imagine Jesus addressing people who experience a sense of being lost in this world, filled with uncertainty about their origins or their ultimate destiny. This teaching provides a spiritual lineage that goes beyond biological inheritance. Every person carries inside themselves that original light which existed before creation, not beings who have fallen and require salvation, but children of luminosity engaged temporarily in playing within the world of forms. This saying brings profound healing to anyone who has experienced feelings of abandonment or lack of love. The identity it declares cannot be acquired through effort or forfeited through failure. It exists prior to the moment of birth and continues beyond the moment of death. That light shining within each individual person is identical to the light illuminating entire galaxies. Saying 70 contains what may be the most psychologically sophisticated teaching found in ancient literature. If you bring forth that which exists within you, what you possess will bring you salvation. If you fail to possess that within you, what you lack will bring about your destruction. Imagine Jesus speaking to individuals trapped inside social roles that fail to align with their inner nature. The tax collector longing to become a poet, the merchant whose dreams involve teaching children, the housewife who carries visions of divine love within her. The teaching indicates that every person carries inside themselves their own distinctive gift meant for the world. The expression of this gift transforms into a matter of spiritual survival. The suppression of it leads toward inner death. The kingdom emerges into being when people discover the courage to manifest their authentic nature. This saying addresses itself directly to modern therapeutic culture's focus on self-expression, yet it penetrates deeper than mere personal fulfillment. That which exists within you refers not to the desires of ego, but to the divine spark seeking to embody itself through each unique individual life. Saying 77 causes conventional religious imagery to explode outward. I am the light, existing over all things. I am all. From me all things came forth, and to me all things return. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up a stone, and you will discover me there. Picture Jesus standing inside a workshop for carpentry, wood shavings scattered at his feet, gesturing toward the ordinary materials of creation. The teaching reveals cosmic consciousness expressing itself through human form. The I that speaks is not personal but rather universal. The light shining through Jesus is the same light shining through all things. Stones and trees transform into temples. Work transforms into worship. The ordinary world unveils its sacred nature. This saying challenges every expression of spiritual elitism. The presence of the divine does not require special buildings or special rituals in order to manifest. It dwells with equal presence in the stones of cathedrals and the rocks of gardens, in texts considered sacred, and in the wood used by carpenters. The mystical becomes as ordinary as the act of breathing. This teaching brings profound comfort to individuals who experience disconnection from traditional settings of religion. The God they are searching for is not imprisoned in distant heavens, but rather lives within the texture of daily existence. Every moment holds the potential for an encounter with what is sacred. The sayings in detail, Part 2. The afternoon sun comes slanting through air filled with dust as we delve into greater depths within Thomas's most challenging teachings. These sayings have generated centuries of debate, their meanings moving and shifting like shadows as different generations uncover new depths concealed within ancient words. Saying 114 brings the gospel to its close with words that have both troubled and inspired readers without number. Simon Peter spoke to them, "Let Mary depart from us, for women do not deserve life." Jesus responded, "I myself will guide her in order to transform her into male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who transforms herself into male will gain entrance to the kingdom of heaven." Picture the disciples assembled around Jesus, their faces showing the social prejudices characteristic of their era. Mary Magdalene sits in quiet presence, her very being challenging assumptions about the spiritual capacity of women. At first glance, this saying seems to support gender hierarchy, but deeper examination uncovers a more complex teaching. The male and female mentioned here are not categories of biology, but rather principles of the spiritual realm. Male represents the active dimension, the seeking aspect of consciousness. Female embodies the receptive dimension, the intuitive realm. Jesus speaks about integration, not about elimination. This teaching challenges every expression of spiritual discrimination. The kingdom belongs to individuals who move beyond social categories, gender roles included. Mary's transformation involves not becoming literally male, but rather developing the full spectrum of human spiritual capacities. Modern scholars focusing on feminism have grappled with the implications of this saying. Some interpret it as evidence of ancient patriarchy. Others recognize it as a radical teaching that ultimately dissolves gender as an obstacle to spiritual realization. The text maintains its controversial nature because it speaks to truths that create discomfort for everyone. Saying 61 presents Jesus engaged in conversation with Salome. "I am the one who exists from the undivided. I received some of the things belonging to my Father." Salome poses a question. "Who are you, man, that you have climbed upon my bed and eaten from my table?" Jesus provides his response. "I am the one who exists from the undivided. I received some of the things belonging to my Father." The dialogue unfolds with the quality of a mystical riddle, with each speaker functioning from different levels of understanding. The question Salome asks reveals the challenge involved in recognizing divine presence clothed in human form. She perceives a man sharing her intimate space, yet fails to perceive the cosmic consciousness expressing itself through him. Jesus responds by indicating his true identity as unified being, undivided from the source. The teaching suggests that divine presence frequently appears wearing unexpected forms. The sacred does not announce its arrival with dramatic fanfare, but rather emerges through interactions that seem ordinary, through human encounters. Recognition demands eyes that have been trained to perceive beyond what appears on the surface. This saying addresses itself to anyone who has failed to recognize the sacred because their expectations involve something more dramatic. The kingdom makes itself known through simple encounters, through meals shared together, through conversations of intimacy. Attention itself becomes the doorway leading to revelation. Saying 17 holds one of Thomas's most cherished promises. I will give you that which no eye has ever seen, and that which no ear has ever heard, and that which no hand has ever touched, and that which has never entered into the human mind. Picture Jesus addressing people who have grown exhausted by the limitations characterizing ordinary experience. They have witnessed beauty that fades away. They have listened to music that comes to an end. They have touched love that vanishes. He makes an offer of something existing beyond the reach of temporal change. The teaching points in the direction of a dimension of reality transcending sensory experience, not another object waiting to be perceived, but rather the very capacity for perception itself. The gift Jesus offers involves the recognition of what they already are, but have allowed themselves to forget. This saying creates resonance with anyone who has caught a glimpse of something existing beyond ordinary consciousness. Those moments of profound peace, those experiences of unity, those intimations of immortality. The teaching validates these glimpses while simultaneously pointing toward their source. The promise reaches beyond individual experience toward collective transformation. That which Jesus offers is not personal enlightenment alone, but rather the emergence of new possibilities for human consciousness as a whole. The kingdom represents evolution occurring in spiritual awareness. Saying 37 reveals the longing of the disciples for direct encounter. When will you reveal yourself to us, and when will we see you? Jesus provides his response. When you remove your clothing without experiencing shame, and you take up your garments, and you place them beneath your feet in the manner of little children, and you walk upon them, then you will see the Son of the Living One, and you will experience no fear. The teaching employs the metaphor of clothing to explore questions of spiritual identity. The disciples seek revelation from outside, but Jesus points toward transformation from within. The garments represent social roles, identities that have been adopted, personas maintained for protection. True seeing demands the courage to stand naked before reality, without the costumes that ordinary life requires. The reference to little children evokes that natural state existing before socialization creates selves that are false. Children engage in dress-up play without confusing costumes with identity. They assume roles with lightness and release them with ease. This flexibility transforms into a model for spiritual maturity. The teaching challenges every expression of spiritual pretense. Authentic encounter with the divine requires the abandonment of those masks, creating separation from ourselves and from others. The revelation arrives not through the accumulation of spiritual credentials, but rather through their release. Saying 106 presents a promise that transforms conventional religious understanding. When you transform the two into one, you will become the sons of man. And when you speak to a mountain saying, "Move away," it will move away. The teaching creates a connection between inner integration and outer manifestation. The two that transform into one refers to those fundamental divisions fragmenting human consciousness, subject and object, self and other, sacred and secular. When these apparent opposites unveil their hidden unity, extraordinary capacities come into being. The metaphor of the mountain moving points beyond literal miracle, working toward the transformation of situations that appear impossible. When consciousness recognizes its own creative power, limitations that seemed external begin to dissolve. The kingdom becomes a realm where faith literally possesses the power to move mountains. This saying addresses itself to anyone who has experienced a sense of powerlessness when facing overwhelming challenges. The teaching suggests that perceived limitations frequently reflect internal divisions rather than external realities. Integration unlocks possibilities that consciousness in its separated state cannot begin to imagine. Saying 113 addresses the questions of the disciples concerning timing. The disciples spoke to him, "When will the kingdom arrive?" Jesus responded to them, "It will not arrive through waiting for it. It will not involve someone saying, 'Here it is,' or 'There it is.' Rather, the kingdom of the Father exists spread out upon the earth, and people do not perceive it." Picture the disciples scanning the horizon, searching for signs of divine intervention, while the kingdom blooms right beneath their feet. The teaching dissolves that future orientation characterizing so much of religious seeking. The kingdom is not coming because it has already arrived, not concealed in some distant realm, but spread out upon the earth in the manner of morning dew. The limitation exists not in the kingdom's absence, but rather in the blindness of perception. This saying brings profound relief to spiritual seekers who have exhausted themselves in waiting for enlightenment. The search reaches its end not in discovering something new, but rather in recognizing what was never lost. The kingdom reveals itself when seeking ceases and seeing commences. The final phrase carries particular poignancy. People do not perceive it. The masculine pronoun suggests that consciousness oriented toward rationality and goals frequently misses what receptive awareness perceives immediately. The kingdom belongs to those capable of receiving rather than achieving. These sayings function together in the manner of movements within a mystical symphony. Each contributes its distinctive tone while serving the composition as a whole. Together, they create a portrait of spiritual possibility that continues inspiring seekers across the span of centuries and across cultures. The Gospel's legacy. The meditation group meeting in the bookstore closes their copies of Thomas as shadows of evening lengthen across the floor. Somewhere across the city, a student at the seminary types the Gospel's sayings into her thesis, exploring alternative Christianity. Inside a prison cell, an inmate copies saying 70 into the pages of his journal. The ancient text sends ripples through modern life in ways those who authored it never could have imagined. Thomas has transformed into a catalyst for spiritual movements, spanning continents and crossing boundaries between religions. The Gospel's emphasis on direct experience creates resonance with people seeking alternatives to institutional religion. The mystical language it employs speaks to seekers who have grown weary of interpretations that are literal. This text offers Christianity designed for the post-Christian age. Communities of progressive Christians have embraced Thomas as validation of their inclusive approach. The Gospel's treatment of women as equals in spiritual matters provides support for feminist theology. The emphasis it places on inner divinity challenges traditional doctrines concerning human sinfulness. Thomas becomes a biblical foundation supporting liberal religious movements. Those in the contemplative tradition discover within Thomas an ancient source for practices of the modern era. Meditation groups utilize the Gospel sayings as focal points for reflection in silence. Centers offering retreats provide workshops exploring Thomas's mystical teachings. This text creates a bridge between wisdom from ancient times and spirituality of the contemporary world. Dialogue between different faiths discovers within Thomas common ground shared between Christianity and other traditions. The Gospel's emphasis on inner light creates resonance with Hindu concepts regarding divine consciousness. The teachings it contains about direct realization echo insights from Buddhism. Thomas becomes a meeting place where world religions can gather. Academic scholarship continues its expansion around the historical and theological significance of the Gospel. New translations make regular appearances, each one offering different perspectives on the meaning contained in the text. Series of commentaries multiply, providing detailed analysis of individual sayings. Thomas generates greater scholarly attention than many books considered canonical. The psychology of religion discovers within Thomas a resource for understanding mystical experience. The Gospel's emphasis on self-knowledge creates alignment with therapeutic approaches to spiritual growth. The teachings it contains about inner transformation speak to individuals working through personal healing. Thomas becomes a bridge connecting ancient wisdom with modern psychology. Environmental movements discover within the gospel a different relationship with the natural world. Saying 77's declaration that the divine dwells within stones and trees challenges Christianity's reputation for ecological neglect. Thomas offers a spirituality recognizing the sacred within material creation. This text influences popular culture through movies, through music, and through literature. Artists discover inspiration in the enigmatic imagery it contains. Writers quote the sayings in their novels and in their poems. Musicians transform the words into melody. Thomas enters into the cultural bloodstream, reaching individuals who may never read the complete text. Online communities have multiplied around the interpretation of Thomas. Websites devoted to this gospel attract visitors numbered in the millions. Groups on social media platforms share insights about the difficult sayings. Digital libraries make the text available to audiences around the globe. Thomas achieves accessibility without precedent. The New Age movement adopts Thomas as a text of core importance. The teachings it contains about hidden divine nature create alignment with metaphysical spirituality. The gospel's emphasis on the transformation of consciousness creates resonance with movements focused on human potential. Thomas becomes a bridge connecting ancient wisdom with modern self-help. Communities focused on therapy discover within Thomas a spirituality supporting healing. The gospel's emphasis on bringing forth what exists within speaks to individuals recovering from trauma. The teachings it contains about inner authority give validation to personal experience. Thomas becomes a resource for spiritual recovery. The text encounters criticism from traditional Christians who perceive it as dangerous deception. Conservative scholars contend that Thomas leads individuals away from biblical faith. The gospel transforms into a battleground between Orthodox Christianity and alternative expressions. Yet, the stream of influence continues its flow. Students at seminaries encounter Thomas in courses exploring Christian origins. Spiritual directors utilize the sayings in sessions of guidance. Ordinary seekers discover in this gospel a path honoring both faith and doubt. The legacy reaches beyond individual transformation toward social change. The gospel challenges hierarchical structures through its teachings on spiritual equality. The teachings it contains about inner authority provide support for democratic movements. Thomas becomes a text for liberation. Movements focused on women's spirituality claim Thomas as an ally in the struggle for religious equality. The Gospel's treatment of Mary Magdalene as a teacher in spiritual matters challenges interpretations rooted in patriarchy. The emphasis it places on inner knowing gives validation to women's experience. The LGBTQ+ community discovers within Thomas a spirituality transcending social categories. The Gospel's vision of unified consciousness offers dignity to individuals rejected by traditional churches. Thomas becomes a harbor of safety for religious minorities. Professionals in mental health discover within the Gospel a resource for spiritual wellness. The emphasis it places on self-knowledge provides support for therapeutic goals. The teachings it contains about inner peace offer healing for wounds of a psychological nature. Thomas becomes a bridge connecting spirituality with psychology. The text continues generating controversy as different groups claim it for their particular causes. Scholars engage in debate about its historical authenticity. Religious leaders raise questions about its theological orthodoxy. Writers reaching popular audiences make claims that academics reject. Yet the core message of the gospel remains constant across all interpretations. Divine presence dwells within us and around us. Direct experience of the sacred is possible for all. Spiritual authority originates from within rather than from sources external to ourselves. These insights prove as revolutionary in our time as they were 2,000 years in the past. The legacy of Thomas extends beyond any single interpretation or application. The gospel has become a living text, continuing to reveal new meanings to each generation that encounters it. The influence it exerts flows through channels those who authored it never imagined. reaching people they never encountered, addressing questions they never posed. In a world growing increasingly hungry for authentic spirituality, Thomas offers a different kind of possibility. Not another religion demanding membership, but rather a way of seeing that transforms every religion. Not another collection of beliefs demanding adoption, but rather a pointing toward the source of all beliefs. The greatest legacy of the gospel may lie in its ability to awaken within readers their own capacity for direct spiritual experience. What if Thomas had one? The bells of the cathedral fall into silence as we engage in imagining a different history. Picture a world where the Gospel of Thomas gained entrance to the biblical canon, alongside Matthew, alongside Mark, alongside Luke, and alongside John. The course of Christianity shifts in the manner of a river changing its channel, flowing toward shores that our actual timeline never reached. Within this alternate reality, the Church Fathers of the 4th century made different choices. Rather than viewing Thomas as a threat to institutional authority, they recognized the spiritual value it contained. The Gospel's emphasis on inner experience created balance with the canonical text's focus on external salvation. Christianity emerged as a religion placing trust in individual spiritual capacity while maintaining communal identity. The institutional church would have developed along different lines. Rather than creating hierarchies characterized by rigidity, claiming exclusive access to divine truth, Christian communities would have emphasized the priesthood of all believers in ways more radical. Every person would carry within themselves the potential for direct spiritual experience. Religious authority would flow from wisdom that has been demonstrated rather than from position that has been appointed. This shift would have transformed Christian theology from its very foundations. The doctrine of original sin would compete with Thomas's teaching concerning original divinity. Rather than viewing humans as beings who have fallen requiring external salvation, Christianity would recognize people as temporarily forgetful children of light. The emphasis would shift from redemption toward remembrance. The relationship between faith and knowledge would have evolved along different paths. Thomas's emphasis on gnosis, or direct spiritual knowing, would have prevented the sharp division between faith and reason, characterizing medieval Christianity. Mystical experience would receive value alongside rational theology. The Church would have developed traditions of contemplative practice far richer. The roles of women in Christianity would have followed a different trajectory. Thomas's treatment of Mary Magdalene as a teacher in spiritual matters would have provided biblical foundation for female religious authority. The Gospel's emphasis on transcending divisions based on gender would have challenged structures rooted in patriarchy. Women might have served as priests and as bishops from the very beginning. The Protestant Reformation might never have taken place, or would have assumed completely different forms. The issues driving reformers to break with Rome, including individual access to Scripture, the priesthood of all believers, and salvation by faith alone, would have been part of Christianity from the start. The Church would have been more flexible, more diverse, more tolerant of different approaches to spirituality. Christian missions would have adopted different approaches to other cultures. Rather than demanding conversion to specific beliefs and specific practices, Christianity, influenced by Thomas, would have searched for the divine spark already present within other traditions. Interfaith dialogue would have developed in natural ways. Christian expansion would have been more about awakening than about converting. The relationship between Christianity and science would have evolved along different lines. Thomas's vision of divine presence within the natural world would have encouraged scientific investigation as a form of spiritual practice. The conflict between faith and reason marking the modern period would have been less severe in nature. Christianity would have been more comfortable with understanding that evolves. The development of Western philosophy would have taken different directions. The sharp dualism between mind and matter, between sacred and secular, characterizing medieval thought, would have been softened by Thomas's emphasis on unity. Mystical philosophy would have maintained stronger influence. The secularization of knowledge would have proceeded with greater gradualness. Art and literature would have reflected different spiritual sensibilities. Rather than focusing primarily on the suffering and sacrifice of Christ, Christian art would have celebrated the divine presence within ordinary life. The mystical tradition would have produced richer artistic expression. Beauty would have been recognized as a pathway leading to the divine. The social implications would have been enormous in scale. Thomas's emphasis on spiritual equality would have challenged social hierarchies more directly. The Gospel's teachings concerning inner authority would have provided support for democratic movements at earlier points in history. Christianity would have been more naturally allied with causes of social justice. The psychological dimension of faith would have developed along different lines. Thomas's emphasis on self-knowledge would have created stronger connections between spirituality and mental health. The integration of psychological and spiritual insights would have proceeded with greater naturalness. Therapy and spiritual direction would have evolved together. The environmental crisis might have been avoided entirely. Thomas's teaching that the divine dwells within stones and within trees would have prevented the exploitation of nature, characterizing industrial civilization. Christianity would have developed stronger ecological awareness. The sacred would have been recognized within the material world. Yet this alternate history would have encountered its own challenges. The diversity Thomas encouraged might have led toward fragmentation. Without institutional structures possessing strength, Christian communities might have lacked the unity necessary for survival. The Gospel's emphasis on mystery might have hindered the development of clear ethical guidelines. The balance between individual and community would have required constant negotiation. Thomas's emphasis on personal spiritual experience might have led toward excessive individualism. The Gospel's mystical focus might have resulted in withdrawal from social engagement. Christianity would have needed to develop new forms of accountability. The relationship with political power would have been more complex in nature. Thomas's anti-hierarchical message would have challenged imperial Christianity from the very start. The Gospel's emphasis on inner transformation would have competed with the need for social order. Christianity would have been more prophetic in character, but perhaps less influential in scope. The gender transcendence Thomas advocated might have created different problems. The Gospel's vision of moving beyond male and female might have failed to address the real inequalities women faced. The emphasis on spiritual equality might have obscured the need for social change. The mystical emphasis might have led toward spiritual elitism. Thomas's teachings concerning secret knowledge could have created groups of insiders, excluding others. The Gospel's difficult language might have been accessible only to educated elites. Christianity would have needed to maintain its message of inclusion. As we return to our actual history, we observe both what was lost and what was gained. The Christianity emerging without Thomas developed institutions possessing strength, doctrines possessing clarity, and influence extending globally. Yet it also lost that mystical dimension Thomas represented. The rediscovery of the gospel in the 20th century suggests that the time may have arrived for integration. Perhaps the future of Christianity lies not in choosing between Thomas and the canonical Gospels, but rather in holding them together in creative tension. The institution and the mystic, the community and the individual, the known and the unknown, all may prove necessary for a spiritual life that is complete. The Gospel, buried for 16 centuries, may still have its greatest contributions lying ahead.